Although for many of you the 1929 UK Census is not very relevant because you don't have any relatives from the UK, I think it's still worthwhile looking at its release, which occurred on the 6th of January in 2022. The National Archives did the release, but they obviously didn't have the wherewithal to digitize and transcribe it, and so it was done by a genealogical website, findmypast.co.uk. Obviously, to recoup their costs, they are charging for access to data from this. To view a single transcript is £2.50, and to view and download a digitized image will cost £3.50. If you are a pro subscriber to Find My Past, you get a 10% discount. I was looking forward to the release of the 1921 UK Census, as I wanted to confirm that the man I was claiming to be my grandfather was in fact my grandfather. And so with eager anticipation I downloaded the sheet of his household, only to have my previous idea of a grandfather shot out of the water, and finding myself with a new grandfather. So what I plan to do in this talk this afternoon is firstly show an advertising video from Find My Past, which shows you how they digitized the census. It's only 4 minutes long, but it demonstrates the enormity of the task and also the little touching details of what they found in the locked away files. Secondly, to actually go live to Find My Past and lead you through to the actual record of my paternal grandparents in Birmingham. And then to show you how each of those records, what they contain and how you can use them. And then secondly, I hope to show you how I took this new data and found out more about my new grandfather and his family. It's only 7 days since I found this new information, so I haven't got that far, even if this is my new grandfather's family. Perhaps at the end you can offer your own point of view.
The 1921 census contains the details of 38 million individuals. It takes 1.6 kilometres of shelving to store all the census books here at Titchfield. These never-before-seen records provide an opportunity to delve into the stories of our ancestors, connecting the past with the present and the future. For a century, they've been locked away. Only now, for the very first time, are they being made available to the public. Find My Past has undertaken the mammoth task of digitizing every last one of these records. Together, they build a picture of life in 1921, preserving the nation's history for us and for future generations. It's taken a team of specialists years to digitize the census, and this is how they did it.
In order to conserve and digitize the 1921 census, majority of the process is manual. So we have the conservation team are reviewing every single volume, schedule by schedule, and they assess each volume. During that assessment, they may repair tears, they'll flatten creases, and they will identify mold.
It's quite hard to identify the mold in the first place sometimes. It can be very brightly coloured, yellow and pink and black and all the colours of the rainbow. And it can also affect the structure of the paper as well, so it's a lot more delicate to handle. I like the sort of nitty-gritty, I like to get my hands dirty essentially, and there's a lot of opportunity to do that in this job.
We've also found a significant number of insects within the census. These 4 insects have met their untimely fate between the pages of these census return forms sometime over the last 100 years.
Once the volume is identified as ready for capture or ready for scanning, it's giving over to one of our scanning technicians. At that point, a scanning technician will feed the schedules through a sheet feed scanner, one at a time. Within the sheet feed scanner, it actually captures an image on both sides through an arrangement of internal mirrors. If there's any part of the volume that has been identified by the conservation team as being too fragile for a machine like that, that is captured with an overhead camera. So all of these different manual processes are in place to maintain the integrity of the original historical documents.
It's been an amazing experience working on this project and working with a team of people that are so passionate about history. Almost all of them have got some kind of a background in heritage, history, libraries and archives, as well as conservation. We have been incredibly fortunate to be able to see these documents firsthand and be the first people to actually see them.
It's actually only the second time that we have access to the original household schedules, and this is the original form that your ancestor wrote on, so you can see your ancestor's signature and see their handwriting. It provides a kind of a micro history of that individual family. It tells a story with just one document. The 1921 census also represents communities of immigrants. We have same-sex couples, and you have disabled ex-servicemen.
We've come across a number of found objects, so things like pressed flowers, coins, pencils. One great example is a small notebook where the owner had been practicing their shorthand. So these objects are recorded and then packaged safely alongside the volumes in which they're found.
To execute a digitization project of this size is a massive effort. It's taken us 3 years to conserve, digitize, and transcribe these records.
I'm just really excited for it to be shared with the world and to be able to openly talk about this with friends and family.
The census records uncover a wealth of information about life in 1921. Information that could change how you see your ancestors, or even how you see yourself. To find out, visit Find My Past. Where will your past take you?
Right, you are. Those of you who've been to Find My Past, and I'm sure that most of you have at some time or other, once you've signed in, this is the screen that you'll come to. So I'm going to use this screen. Let me just get my notes off my keyboard and enter my grandmother's name because it's her record that I want to find. She was a Sarah Ann Pratt. She was born in 1874, about, and you'll see they give a 2-year range for that. And she was in Birmingham, in Warwickshire, England. So I can click on that and the number drops down to 84. And if you look down the page further, let me click on that. And once you've got the set of 84 results appearing on in the center of the screen there, we can actually go down and choose census, land and survey records only, which will give us 54 records. And then under those, we can choose census records, which will give us 6. And if we look at those, we'll see that one is the 1911 census, which I have already, and the next one is the 1921 census. If we click on, or even put our mouse over this, the transcribed side of it, it'll tell you who's living there. It's Sarah Ann, Charles, Margaret, and 2 others on this record. And it'll tell you that it's a legible translation of the original record. Shows that, tells you what you'll find, which I'm going to do in this talk anyway, and will show you a map of the local area, which I'm going to show you anyway. Over here, it tells you which is the image, and it tells you the same story, and I've actually paid for it, so I'll click on it now, and it should take me to the image. There we are. Here is the census record, as you can see, of Sarah Ann Pratt. There she is. And above it, Charles Pratt, Margaret Boardman, Leslie Boardman, and Thomas Pratt, and all their information across this sheet. You'll also, let me just give you a guideline around this page so that when you come here, you might find it slightly easier to understand what's available. If you think the film strip is getting in the way, you can easily close it, which would remove this bottom strip. The picture we're looking at is the one with the eye on at the moment, as you can see. It also gives you extras, as they call it. I'll click on that, and it gives you, as you can see, 5 extras. These are the original image, which we're looking at, the cover. I'll come back to all of these and show you more detail not online, but because I've enlarged them so you can see them. It also gives you the address and the instructions, a map of where the area is, and a more description, a longer description of what the area is. If I tick transcripts, it tells you who's the names of the people who appear there. And if you click on one of those, it'll investigate to see whether you've paid. And because I haven't paid for a transcript, it just says you're going to be buying a 1921 census of England, the same story you saw when you moved your mouse over the transcript icon in the previous screen, but it also gives you how much it's going to cost you. £2.50, we reduced to 2.25 because of my pro subscription to them. It also got my Visa card already entered from when I paid for the subscription last year sometime. And if I just click check out securely, Bob's your uncle, my phone will beep and tell me that I've just had £2.25 or taken off my Barclays card, credit card. So I'm not going to do that today. So the digital image which I downloaded, and you can see it perhaps slightly more clearly. I know it's going to be quite small. I don't want to show you the whole screen here, and then I'll take you through it as we go through the rest of the screen. The cover, this is what else you get. This is the cover. It doesn't give you much information except to tell you that it's Birmingham, and the sub-district is Ladywood in Birmingham, and it's enumerated district number 48 within that Birmingham district. Then, and the rest you can see here's the reference. I'm sure you're used to these references from other indexes, RG15/14054 written across it. So that's what that volume is numbered. And it just once again tells you suburbs and where it falls under, the parish name, and all those sort of bits of information. Now, the back of the census form that we saw 2 slides ago has 3 sections. So I've cut them up into 3 sections to show you. The first one is just tells you about the schedule and the notice. I'm pretty sure looking at my family's filling in, they didn't really read all this fine print. But I'm sure it's also saying that you can see at the bottom, if any person whose duty it is to make a return to give information refuses to do so, or willfully gives false information, blah, 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 they will be fined £10. So these are sort of making it all legal and saying you've been warned, etc. You'll notice in the middle here, the registration district, as I said, 384 for the centre of Birmingham, sub-district 1, enumerators district 48. Head of the household is entered as Charles Pratt, which I knew his name and I just wanted to find his background. But then the postal address, it says 4 Upper Field Buildings, Sheepcote Street. There's some disagreement whether it's Upfield or Upper Fields Building. But, you know, that's what happens in these sort of documents. The middle section is a set of instructions. And if you talk about reading the small print, then this certainly is the case. Giving you some data about how you fill in information. As I say, I'm pretty sure my ancestors didn't bother, my grandmother, grandfather didn't bother to read this much, and you'll see the mistakes that they made on the sheet that they filled in. They do give a set of examples. This is set at a 90-degree, so I had to do a clockwise turn to get this on so that you can read it. And it's a set of examples of how you fill it in. Once again, it's one of those sort of dreadful forms that is trying to show you all possibilities, which is, of course, needless to say, your case never fits any of the possibilities they give in the example. It's the one-size-fits-all type problem that we have with forms and so on. And then they give you the map. You can see it says Birmingham 384, which is the area. And here's the map of Birmingham. I'm going to make a larger image of that for you shortly. And it gives you some information about what it consists of, the area and the different parishes, All Saints, Ladywood, St. Mary's, St. Martin's, and so on. You'll notice around the outside, Aston. I must admit, my father always said he was an Aston Villa fan. West Bromwich, he didn't seem to be a West Bromwich Albion fan. And then there's King Norton. Those are the other registration districts around Birmingham. And then comes the actual description of the enumerators district. The rest is sort of the same information that we saw on the cover, that part there. But here in this description, it tells you exactly along this road, across this road, follow the boundary of the parish until you go here, and then down this road till you come back to your starting point. And that gives you the area which this enumerator had to visit, and it lists all the streets, including Sheepcote Street. And if you can see that they're number 1 to the corner of Grosvenor Street West. So obviously my grandparents lived somewhere between 1 and the corner of Grosvenor Street West, because that's where they were living, in Sheepcote Street. I've blown up the map slightly, but it's all in black and white, so it's very difficult to discern streets. There's no street names printed in or anything like that. But I managed to work out, using modern maps and things like that, exactly where they were. They lived in this area here, and so I blew that up. This is a canal, and a canal branch going round like that. Sheepcote Lane is this one, or street is this one going through there. So, and I think Grosvenor West is there. So it goes down here, down there, along Rylands, and back up to Sheepcote. That's the district here to go knocking on doors and handing out these forms, and then coming around later and collecting them and making the changes that are necessary when they've been filled in incorrectly. I've just done a Google Maps to show you the same area. There you can see the canal more clearly. And there's Sheepcote Road going to Grosvenor West over here, down there, along Rylands, and then across to Sheepcote again. Just back to show you the whole picture again. And now I'm going to show you the headings across the top here, and I'm going to blow them up so that you can read them more clearly to see what has to be filled in. First one is the first 5 columns, names and surnames. You'll notice the first thing it says, you've got to give the name and surname of every person alive at midnight on the night of the Sunday, the 24th of April, 1921. Well, unfortunately, there was industrial unrest in April, and so they delayed the census till June, 19th of June, 1921. Then the relationship to the head of the household. You've got to either enter head, wife, mother, son, daughter, the same as always all the other censuses that we've looked at in the past. For the first time, you are asked to fill in the years and the age, the age in years and months. But I notice on my family's sheet, only my father, who was 1 year and 8 months, had any months written in. The rest, they didn't bother to count the months. Under sex, they enter male or female. Interestingly, under marriage or orphanhood, it's an awful way of putting it, if your person is over 15, you've got to write single, widowed, married. And for the first time, as the video said, that you're now allowed to enter divorced. So you can enter a D if the person is divorced. And for children under 15, they want to know if the parents are alive, which is quite useful information. You write both alive if both parents are alive, or father dead, mother dead, or both dead, whatever fits in. And then the second group of columns, as birthplace and nationality. If born in the UK, obviously that's not a problem. If outside, you've got to write the country's name. If born at sea, you write at sea. And then in this column G, you fill in British born, naturalized British, subject of France or whatever. And that gets filled in there. Once again, very similar to previous census forms. And then personal occupation. This time, for the first time at school, they want to know if it's a full-time or whole-time, is the way they put it, or part-time at school, filled in on column H. Column K, the precise branch of profession, trade, manufacture, service, etc. So that we've always had that occupation on the census record, so that's the same. But now for the first time, you suddenly have to give the employer's name. And if you're out of work, you can fill in out of work. If you are working for yourself, it's working own account, etc. So now you've suddenly got employers' names being filled in on the census record, which is really quite interesting, as you'll see as I go on a bit further. The last 2 columns, I'll do them separately. The first one is place of work. So now you even have to put the address of where you're working. And obviously, if you a person who's not at a regular place of work, you just put no fixed place. Or if you're at home, like most of the wives were in those days, you just say at home. Other column, the last column, deals with children. I made a separate picture of that. And this tells you to put in the total number of children the head of the household might have. And in this case, they put 2 next to Charles. But then my grandmother filled in next to the children's names the dates of birth, the age of the 1 year for my father and 10 years for his half brother. And they crossed it out and they put it in the right place up here. I think which all goes to sort of show what I'm going to talk about next, the things of interest that I found on the census form for my family. First of all, I think the inexperienced handwriting obviously demonstrates that the person who filled in this form was not highly educated, and the many mistakes and the ink blots and the crossing outs, which indicate this, I think. The second thing I noticed was, in fact, it wasn't Charles who's the head of the household, as they say, but rather his wife, Sarah Ann Pratt, my grandmother, who filled in the form and signed it as being correct to the best of her knowledge. The second point, which I think I found interesting, was, of course, Charles Pratt, who I suddenly found that he was born in Bradford and not in Birmingham. I'll come to that. Here's the list of the 5 residents in that home. Charles Pratt, head. Sarah Ann Pratt, wife. Margaret Boardman, daughter, 16, single, because she's over 15, so they've got to fill in single, married, or widowed. Leslie Boardman, who's 10, and Thomas Pratt, 1 and 8 months. There, Sarah, my grandmother, has filled in both alive next to those 2 names. Well, in fact, Leslie Boardman's father is dead. John Boardman, Thomas, I think John Thomas Boardman, died in 1916. That's why Sarah Ann married Charles Pratt in 1919. So Thomas Pratt, my father, has got both parents alive at this point, but Leslie certainly hasn't. It's those sort of mistakes that you spot on this form. And as I say, I don't think they read the instruction sheet. They just filled in and hoped for the best. Charles Pratt noticed as well that they suddenly spelt with an I in there. Keep that in mind. I'll come to that later. And then both alive, I've spoken about that one. What also I found fascinating is Margaret Boardman, the 16-year-old daughter of Sarah Ann Pratt, formerly Boardman, born Parish. She's single female, but look what the job she does. She's a turning lathe, brass turner. Isn't that rather fascinating to find a 16-year-old woman doing that job? But of course, this is post First World War, where more and more women were working in factories and doing what was previously considered to be men's jobs. So that sort of bears that out. It also gives the name of the company she works for, which is Messenger and Son. That should be a MESSENGER and Sons Limited, lamp manufacturers, etc. And they are in Broad Street, it says. Samuel S. Messenger and Son was founded in 1835 and moved to Broad Street in 1888. They made chandeliers, candelabras, lamps, and gas fittings. They exhibited at the 1851 Great Exhibition, and they also made many other lamps, etc. But they ceased trading in early 1930s. So Margaret was, 1921. Therefore, she only had about 10 years in that job before it shut down. Here's a picture of the advert of Messenger and Son, manufacturers of chandeliers, tripods, and lamps, it says. This is from the 1851 Great Exhibition. And here is another logo on it looks like one of those little knobs that you turn up the wick with in paraffin lamps, etc. And it's got the Messenger logo around it, and BIRM for Birmingham. Charles Pratt Still not sure about his age, whether it's 52 or 53. He worked for John Barnsley, house contractor. Notice Sarah put down painter, house, in order not to think that it's a painter being an artist. And he worked in Ryland Street. I looked up John Barnsley and rather interestingly found that he was a family firm of builders and contractors and involved in many public buildings in Birmingham. And during the First World War, he was a major, commanded the 1st Birmingham Battalion in the Warwickshire Regiment. One of his sons died, in fact, in France, and was a staunch Methodist and a lay preacher there and everything. He stood for Parliament but wasn't elected, and he died in 1926. So a good, upright citizen that Charles Pratt worked for. And then my father, Thomas Pratt, son, 1 year, 8 months, both alive, born at Sheepcote Street, Birmingham, which is where we will come to now. Just to mention my Leslie, my uncle Les had 2 daughters. We met Leslie in 1967. I was 1960. I was 10 at that point. And then in 2008, we met the 2 daughters. None of them knew anything about Charlie Pratt. So it would appear that I found a new grandfather, different from the one I thought was my grandfather, one that was actually born in Bradford and not in Birmingham. We knew the name Charles Pratt because it appears on my father's birth certificate, which Leslie Boardman very kindly got for me in 1980 something, and was very useful for getting British passports, etc. And you can see Thomas Pratt, born on the 27th of September 1919, and he was born at 4 back the Albany Sheepcote Street. We knew more about Charles Pratt, at least I did, with the help of many people who helped me online from Warwickshire, the old web service that used to have those emails, etc. And they managed to find Charles Pratt and Sarah Ann Boardman getting married on the 21st of June, 1919. So it's also quite fascinating to see that. It is only, 3 months or less before my father was born. Charles Pratt was 49 years old, and Sarah was 45 and pregnant with my father when they married. They were entered as widower and widow. He says he lives in Rowton House, Alcester Street, Birmingham. And his father's name was Thomas Pratt. Remember that name, please. And his father's occupation, as on the marriage certificate, is mechanical engineer. Remember that as well. Charles Pratt didn't live long after marrying my grandmother. He died on the 18th of May, 1924. He was 54 years of age when he died. He died at 77 Dudley Road. I'm not quite sure why he died there and what was there, but his normal address was 4 Upfield. You see, it's no longer Upperfield. It's now Upfield Buildings, Sheepcote Street, Birmingham. And his cause of death is pneumonia, pulmonary abscesses, cardiac failure. And filled in by S.A. Pratt, who is the widow of the deceased. Now, with my grandmother, I don't know if you can see it, I know it's small print. You can see that's her down there, Sarah Ann Parrish. I've entered her onto a tree with Leslie Boardman, just so that you can see the spread of the family. Sarah, I've traced her way back to 1755, 1757, through the Parrish family, I love the name of this particular wife of Charles Parish, who's Obedience Dingley, which is a rather lovely name for a wife. Now, I made some assumptions concerning Charles Pratt. The first is that Charles would likely be from Birmingham, as poorer people already in an industrial city were unlikely to move about much. Those in the country certainly move to industrial cities looking for work, but if you're already there, it's unlikely you're going to move on because you haven't got the money to do so. So I looked for all Charles Pratts in Birmingham. People of that era and social standing maybe didn't have a very accurate concept of the years of birth. And perhaps that's a huge assumption on my part. And in fact, I think it is. Thirdly, because Charles was living in a men's hostel when he married Sarah, and I'll tell you more about that later, perhaps he'd left his first wife and was therefore homeless. And that's what I saw, and that's what I decided was correct. Once again, an assumption. Fourthly, with the birth of my father 3 months after their marriage, I presumed that it was a sort of shotgun marriage. And the man I thought was my grandfather said he was a widower and gave a false name for his father's name on the marriage certificate. Once again, that's a huge assumption on my part, regretting it now that the 1921 census has come out. And finally, when Charles married Sarah, he said he was 49 years old. So he was born 1870. When he died, he said he was 54, which also means he was born in 1870. But the Charles Pratt I decided was my grandfather and who I traced back and forward and everything was born in 1866. And that's just, I think, too big a gap and made me have doubts about this whole, whether this was the right person. Now, when I got the document, surprise, big surprise that he was born in Bradford, not in Birmingham. And the second big surprise is that he was 52 in 1921, which also means he was born in 1870. Now, all these ages of the wedding certificate, the census, and the death certificate now all match. And so therefore, it looks like I have found the right. This is the Charles Pratt, so it is the other Charles Pratt was incorrect, is what I'm now thinking. So I went to find a birth in Bradford of a Charles Pratt about 1870. I used a website. I don't know if any of you use this for English births. It's the gro.gov.uk website. You have to register your name and so on. But once you've done that, you can sign in and do a search. So this is the sort of page you get. You can only choose, you can search the index, online indexes. You can only search births and deaths. You can't do marriages, unfortunately. The little stars next to the entries means you've got to have something in that field, but not all of them are compulsory, as you can see. So I chose 1869 just to make sure that I was covering all the Pratts involved. It's a 2-year, and you can change that. So, I mean, you can look, I'll come back to that. Surname Pratt, first name Charles, sex male, district Bradford. I'm just going to give you the search, the result I found for that. No matching results found. Oops. But before we move on from the oops to see what happened there, let me just explain one of the usefulnesses of this particular online index search. You can enter your surname at birth and also the mother's maiden surname, no Christian names, and then you can do a search. You don't need to enter the district birth. So if you have Pratt, and in this case, Boardman, you could do a search and the number of male babies born to that relationship will pop up. And you can add on 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and it'll give you all of those. So you can get a whole family if necessary, and when they were born, between one census record and the next, perhaps. And some children that perhaps were born and died between census records, you can spot them as well. The thing that catches me out every time is the sex, when I'm busy looking for daughters and I forget to change this to female. So be warned when you do this, make sure you change that to female, otherwise it won't throw up the answers you're looking for. So there I was, minus knowing where my grandfather was born in Bradford, but I thought maybe he was born on the edges of Bradford and falling under a different registration district. So therefore, let me look under something which searches a bit wider. So I used Find My Past, and I searched for births in 1870, which is the 2-year bias, which gave me a ratio, which gave me the birth of 1871 of a Charlie Pratt in Bradford. That was all very exciting. And so I thought, is this him? Was he the right man who married my grandmother? I thought the best way was to follow census records through to 1919 when the marriage took place. So I did a search, first of all, in Bradford, found 1871 records, etc. In fact, the first one I found was an 1891 census. Here he is still entered as Charlie Pratt. He's the son of the head of the household, who's Thomas Pratt. I don't know if I told you to remember that name, because that's the name that appeared on the marriage certificate of Charles Pratt and Sarah Boardman in 1919. And look at these: occupation, steam engineer fitter. And in fact, on the marriage certificate said mechanical engineer, or words to that effect. So this looked like the right Charles Pratt and the right father, his own father, matching the father on the marriage certificate, father's occupation, matching that on the certificate. So then I'm getting closer, but I need to find Charlie, or Charles' first marriage, as he's entered as a widower when he married my grandmother in 1919. And then I had to find his first wife's death, and then somehow or other show that he moved from Bradford to Birmingham. And so I looked for the 1901 census and then the 1911 census. So the 1901 census, in fact, gave me the fact. You can barely see it. I don't know if I've got arrows pointing to. Oh, I haven't. But there's Charlie, and this time spelled with a Y, L-E-Y, Pratt. Still, he's a dye laborer, as he was before. He's now married to Mary Ann. In 1901, he was married already with 3 children, and she was a worsted weaver. And his 3 children are Annie, Elizabeth, and Harold Pratt. So then I started searching for their marriage, which I duly found. It took place in 1891, literally 3 months or so, 2 months after the census. 1891 census took place. He married Mary Ann Wilson. So I've got her maiden name. She was 19, he was 20. And Thomas Pratt, mechanic, on this marriage certificate, matching the one on the 1919 one. Father's name, Joseph Wilson was Mary Ann's father, and he was also a mechanic. They got married at St. Peter's Parish Church, which is now the Cathedral of Bradford. So let's look for the 1911 census. Well, what I found, the only Pratt I found, or Charles Pratt, I found living there, let me point to him. It's very difficult to read, I'm sure. It's the 1911 census, and it shows you no address or no, but it does show you inmate. So I thought, oh, is it a hospital? Is it a poorhouse? What is it? It was in fact a lodging house for homeless men. There are a few problems with this. I don't know if I've got arrows pointing at it. Yes, I have. First of all, his age, 44 years. If you take the 1911 minus 44, you end up with a different, I can't remember the year, I think you get 1868. So it's different from the 1870, 1871s that I found in other census records. So is this the man? He's now a bricklayer's laborer. And not working in a dye house, but I mean, that could happen. And then you'll find that the thing that really throws the cat amongst the pigeons and makes me start to have doubts that this is the right Charles Pratt is that he was born in Jarrow in Northumberland and not in Bradford. I know it's just a bit further north, but it's still a bit of a concern, that one. But what I did find I then looked for his wife in the 1919 census, and I didn't find his wife at all. But what did pop up in passenger lists was a Mary Ann Pratt, which is the right name, married from Bradford. Can you see those on this form? And then there's Florence, Annie, Elizabeth, and Harold. So those are the three children. So Mrs. Pratt and the three children are heading off to Philadelphia in the United States. But no Mr. Pratt here. I wonder why not? Well, I then used something on the Find My Past. Now, I don't work for Find My Past. I wish they'd pay me for pushing it for amongst you all this afternoon. But on Find My Past is the British newspaper archives. So I searched for Charles Pratt there, and particularly with the keyword of Bradford. And this popped up, which I think is rather interesting. So I'm just going to read it to you because I'm pretty sure you can't read this slightly blurred looking print. It says the value of characters, that's the headline, but I think they mean a value of character references rather than just characters. A labourer named Charles Pratt, 33, of 19 Prince Street, was charged at the City Police Court on Thursday with assaulting his wife, M.A. Pratt. Mary Ann? The complainant alleged that the prisoner had frequently assaulted her and had turned her out of the house. The stipendiary read a communication from the prisoner's employers, which stated that Pratt was, quote, steady, hardworking, and industrious workman, end quote. Mr. Skidmore remarked that this showed the value of characters or character references. Here was a man who'd been convicted of assaulting his wife and had frequently been under the influence of drink, and yet his employers described him as steady and industrious man. Superintendent Blenkinsop stated that the prisoner had been convicted of felony and assaulting his wife. The stipendiary said that this was another instance of men giving person character references and when they knew nothing about them. The prisoner was fined £2 and 7 shillings and 6pence costs, with alternative of 1 month's imprisonment. Now, this could explain why Mary Ann Pratt, born Wilson, left her husband to travel to the United States with their 3 children, and also see why we find Charles Pratt living in a working man's hostel in 1911. However, we still have 8 or 9 years missing until we find him again in 1919, getting married to my grandmother. Here's the cover of the enumerator's book of the 1911 census, just to show you what the institution that he was considered to be an inmate of, and that is the registered lodging house, the model lodging house. Just to tell you something about these lodging houses, this one was, as you can see, from 154 to 158 Sunbridge Road, Bradford. The model lodging houses were set up from the 1830s by a philanthropic organization who campaigned for the improvement of housing conditions of, quote, unquote, the laboring classes. There are many different societies, and many of them erected model buildings and put into practice the principles they advocated. These model schemes included not only family homes, but also lodging houses for single people. And this is exactly what this is. It was a large lodging house, as I'll show you now. This is what it looks like today in Sunbridge Road in Bradford. Most of the organizations were operated, however, as businesses with shareholders who typically received a 4 or 5% return on their investment to build lodging houses such as these. And as a result, these philanthropists were known as the 5% philanthropists. There's one other picture that I found when I entered Sunbridge, the model lodging house, etc., and that's this one. It comes from the Bradford Museum Galleries, and I'm using it without permission because they want to charge quite a lot for it. And I decided I wouldn't pay all that money. And there's a long story attached to this picture, which shows a service at Sunbridge Road Lodging House. And it comes from a book called Making of a Mission, written by the Bradford Wesleyan Mission House, and was published in 1911. So more or less the time, if my Charles Pratt was there that if it is the right Charles Pratt, that he would be there. So I've spent many hours looking at each of those faces to see if any of them look anything like my father, to say that's his father. I must admit that one gentleman there does have a slight look like my father, but I think it's a bit of a biased opinion from me as I look at it. What they're doing there is having the Methodist Church had numerous organizations, and one of them is called Out and Out Bands. Another's called the Aggressive League, with a terrible title, but their job was to go out and bring people to God. And so this Aggressive League had wonderful lodging house services under the direction of Sister Katerina. I wonder if she's one of the ladies in the back there. Under her guidance, the young men and women of the Methodist Society classes have done fine winter work, it says, at the Sunbridge Road. The fortnightly service has been a great success. There's always been a good company of lodgers, and when the lantern was being used, the numbers swelled to 3 figures. And if you look carefully in the background there, you can just see that slide projector type lantern, as they called it in those days, being used, and a good crowd sitting watching this presentation. I don't know if any of you noticed that at the bottom of this picture over here, it says C. Pratt, which got me quite excited at first until I read that it's a reproduction of some 50 negatives which are in the Bradford Museum Gallery, or available there, with painted areas, and all of them are signed C. Pratt, and the C. Pratt stands for Christopher Pratt, who was a chemist working in the dye houses and that sort of thing, quite well known in Bradford at that time. And like many early photographers, being a chemist meant because you had to develop your own film and use all the chemistry tricks and things like for that. Now, somehow between that 1911, if that is our man, living in the model lodging house, and through to 1919, when he married my grandmother, he must have moved from Bradford to Birmingham. And we must realize, of course, this is during the First World War, where perhaps there was a lot more movement of middle-aged, as he would have been at that point, men, a man in his 40s who was still employable, and so quite easily to move out and find jobs elsewhere and move southwards towards Birmingham from Bradford. On the marriage certificate, it says he was living at Rowton House. And I must admit, when I first saw that, I thought, oh, he must have been working as a groom or something like that in a posh aristocrat's residence. But a quick Google search produced from Wikipedia this very fascinating leaflet, which is in fact another leaflet for another house for homeless men. Rowton House in Highgate Park, Birmingham, opened in 1903. The building's original name, Rowton House, was taken from its founder, a philanthropist called Lord Rowton, who in the late 1800s built a series of buildings in England that provided large numbers of migrant workers a decent living condition. The guests were predominantly Irish labourers who were rejected from their traditional lodging houses. I don't know if even up to about the 1950s, there were signs up saying no blacks, no Irish, no dogs in a lot of the lodging houses. So you can see why these had to be built in order to house Irish labourers. But of course, other homeless men would also be allowed in. It originally had accommodation for 800 men, all housed in individual wooden paneled cubicles. It's an example of those wooden paneled cubicle. The ground floor, and I'll show that in a few moments, housed an enormous dining room, feeding a vast number of men, and were amenities such as shops, barber, tailor, shoemaker, all on site. George Orwell, in his book Down and Out in Paris and London, wrote about lodging houses. He wrote, "The best are the Rowton houses, where the charge is £1. It obviously went up a bit more from 1911 when that was printed, for which you get a cubicle to yourself and the use of an excellent bathroom. The Rowton houses are splendid buildings, and the only objection to them is the strict discipline." So wrote George Orwell. Here are just some of the plans of the building, which are available at I've forgotten the man's name, but he has lots of oh, there he is, www.workhouses.org.uk. And so these are all his copyrighted pictures. You can see how this is the entrance room, a few steps up from the road, entrance vestibule. This is not the one in Birmingham. This is the one in London, but it's a similar design. Cubicles for the men on either side and on the side in the middle. Down this side is a large reading room for the men to sit and read, and a writing room for them to sit at desks and write. These funny little star-shaped things here are in fact fan lights for the basement where everything else happened, and this is the basement. It shows all the different rooms available, the kitchen, the scullery, the larder, the shop where they sold stuff to the residents, the large dining room that was described, and a place where the lodgers could wash up their plates and knives and forks. It also has lockers, a smoking room for them, a barber, shoemaker, tailor, where they could wash their own clothes, foot baths, WCs, urinals, what they call lavatories, which are basically wash-hand basins where men could shave and wash, and lockers and so on. So they were well looked after in these homes. This is what Rowton House looks today. It's called Rowton Hotel, not Rowton House. Sorry, that's a misprint. It's called Rowton Hotel. Has a very nice looking web page, but when I looked on TripAdvisor, it's a 3-star hotel, but of the 486 reviews, 268 gave it 1 star and said how terrible it was. So it obviously needs to be fixed up and tidied up and remanaged somehow or other. And then I noticed there was an August 2021 Birmingham Mail article saying that this Rowton Hotel is going to be housed 387 asylum seekers. So you can see how the whole thing has sunk into a sort of rather not so good state of repair. From there, Charles must have married or did marry my grandmother in Upfield Building in Sheepcote Street. And that's where the 1921 census was taken. Charles died in 1924, and I have no picture of him. But here is the rest of the family, excluding my father, taken in 1926, 2 years after Charles's death, and they were still living in Upfield Building. In the background, you can see what it was like, a tenement sort of house, nice big windows, but obviously there's no large garden or anything like that for the Pratt family. And just looking at the picture, here is Sarah Ann Pratt, my grandmother. Next to her is the groom's father, and the groom is Philip Sanders, so this is Mr. Sanders. And then there's Margaret Boardman, 16-year-old. I mean, she's now 21 or so, no, more than that. No, she's 20 plus 5, 16, 21. She's 21, and she was the lady who was doing the brass turning on the lathe. And then there's her younger brother, who presumably is acting as father of the bride. That's Uncle Leslie Boardman. And I presume this is Mrs. Sanders, Phil Sanders' mother, and the 2 bridesmaids. As I said, Leslie is my father's half-brother, and we met up with him in 1960. I was 10, so I don't remember much of that at all. And we also met his 2 children, related to them, and we met them again in 2007, and they gave me this picture, as well as a few others of my father, many of the wedding, for example, sent obviously by him to his mother and so on. His mother, my grandmother, died 1958. So there are quite a few hints that make me think that this Charles Pratt is my grandfather. Number 1, Bradford has fewer Charles Pratts than Birmingham. In fact, I only found 1 during the birth period, and that was Charlie Pratt, or Charles Pratt. Matching birthplace in the 1921 census matches up with Bradford. Matching name of father on the marriage certificate and the Bradford Charles Pratt in the census records. The matching father's profession on the marriage certificate and the Bradford Charles Pratt in the census record. Living in institution for working men in 1911 and 1919. However, there's some details that worry me, and it's mainly about the ages. His marriage showed that he was born in 1870. His death also proves that he was 1870. But the age in the 1921 census makes it depends on how you read it. As a 52, it would be 1 year out. But if it is 53, it's 2 years out. Maybe that was just Sarah making a mistake, writing 53 and then trying to cross it out. And that's why it looks such a mess on the form. He was Charles. Yeah, so if he was the Charles from Bradford, his birth was registered in the March quarter, 1871, as I found at the GRO records. And then on the 21st of June, when the census took place, he would have been 48, not 49 years old. And in 1924, when he died, he would have been 53, not 54. There's only 1 year difference, but one has one's doubts, one lingering doubts. And then that also just talks about the census and those errors in the census record of 1911 about whether he is my Charles Pratt and whether he was what that birth record showed in Jarrow, Northumberland, not Bradford. So I went and checked the Jarrow births. The Jarrow falls under, in those days, fell under South Shields registration district. And I could find no Charles Pratt in the 10-year period between 1865 and 1975. So did the census taker get it wrong? Was Charles Pratt making up this part of his story? Is this Charles Pratt my grandfather? What do you think? And just out of interest, the original Charles Pratt I had as my grandfather appeared to be a bigamist. I was rather proud of that. Mary Ann Pratt, born Wilson, went to the States and married a chap called Ken Rogan before 1920 and only died in 1953. So this Charles Pratt was also a bigamist. So I still can claim that as a badge of honor. Thank you very much. I'm just going to switch off these two so I can. There we go.
Well, Derek, thank you very much for that. It was most illuminating, the story, and certainly a lot of food for thought for people looking for relatives during that time. I think that a lot of those chaps, they didn't really, I don't think they really knew when they were born. And that's why you probably had a bit of a confusion unless you get a complete, accurate record.
Yes, and most of them come from, his father was a mechanic fixing steam engines. His mother was a weaver. He worked in a dye house from the age of, 19. Certainly he was working in that as a laborer in a dye house in the clothing manufacturing in Bradford. So they wouldn't have kept a record of the birth or anything like that. Oh. And of course, divorce as well, talking about that last comment, was also something fairly new. Up to about 1930, it was very expensive to get a divorce, and only the rich or the middle class upwards could afford it. Certainly not bricklayers and that sort of job.
Well, I think that's why the people just moved away. I mean, we've had a couple of people who were just abandoned, and they've built a new life, in a different town, and nobody traced them. I mean, they couldn't be traced. Has anybody got any other further questions for Derek?
If you have, you must unmute yourself first. He can't unmute all of you, I'm afraid. You've got to do it one by one.
Yeah. I think some of them are a bit shy to ask, Derek.
Yes, one of the questions I see is appearing on the chat asks, how often did they do the census in England, and would World War I have postponed it? They did it every 10 years from 1841. There were some earlier ones. The first national one was 1841, 51, 61, 71, 81, 91, 101, 111, and now 121. And then we hit a brick wall, because 1931 was done, but it was placed in a warehouse in London, which got bombed during the Blitz. So the 1931 census is now lost. 1941, because of the Second World War, it wasn't done. So the next time they can release a census will be in 2051. I don't know how many of you are still going to be around in 2051. I'll be 101 at that point.
Well, I'm sure you'll be around, Derek. You won't be much bothered about it, I shouldn't think.
No. Scottish data, someone's asked. I was watching that on Find My Past. They have videos every Friday, by the way. So if you want to sort of go onto YouTube and find those videos, they do go on a bit, and I get a bit annoyed because they waffle a bit too much. But I suppose for people who are new to doing genealogy, it might be more acceptable. But the Scottish data is kept separately in Scotland. On Find My Past for the earlier, and certainly not the 1921 one, but the earlier ones, they do have the transcribed records, but not the original census forms. Those you can get from Scotland's People, the website Scotland's People. And the Scottish are very canny. They've immediately, from many years ago, they already had you could pay for it and fill in your credit card and get it emailed to you, at least, or download it, etc. I use them quite a lot. I carry a bit of a credit with them because I look for so many people in Scotland. You have to, and they're clever because you have to buy £10 worth, and each birth certificate is basically, you have to buy 10 units, which is, I can't remember the price of 10 units, but each birth certificate is 6 units. So you're left with 4 units, and you have to buy another 10 in order to get another birth certificate. So they really are quite clever.
It sounds like a Scottish man.
Yeah. I'm just trying to put DNA help. Someone's asked, yeah, sorry, Jill, you wanted to ask something. Yes.
I got a bit lost with who's who in the zoo, but somewhere back there was a Mary Ann. Was that the one born?
No.
Who's the one?
Mary Ann married Charles Pratt in Bradford, and he obviously beat her up and was drunk.
Yes, no, I want to go back to the one who was Boardman.
Yes. That was my grandmother married a Boardman. Yes.
Right. Okay. But now there were other children called Boardman. So that was from a previous marriage.
That's correct. Sarah Pratt was previously Boardman, born Parish.
Right. And then when she married the Pratt, she was pregnant. Is that right?
Yes.
With what they thought was a Pratt. But was it a Pratt?
I think so, because unless her pregnancy started in 1916 through to 1919, he died. John Thomas Boardman died 1916. Okay. I found his.
Okay, now with the things I wasn't quite sure.
Yes,
I got muddled up as to what happened, because all I know is in my own family history, there's a whole. I can go back in different directions, but the one direction there is just a complete blockage because nobody knows who's who in the zoo on one of the items.
In that sort of case, it often helps with the DNA, and that's certainly what someone's asked. Renee's asked here. Thank you for a very interesting talk and well researched. Would DNA not help? It would if I can find a Bradford Pratt.
Right.
You know, the only and Charles and Sarah only had one son, my father. The other two were Boardmans and so on. So I am, it's very difficult to find a relative.
No, I just got muddled. I got a bit lost. Never mind. But it was very, very interesting, and it must have taken you hours of hard work to do.
Well,
this.
I only looked at it.
Thank you, Derek, for the talk.
I only first looked at this result on the 7th of January. So it's taken me a week to find out what I've just shown you today. If I'm
incredible.
Sweating, that's why. Someone else says, I hope Charlie didn't assault your grandmother as well. I have no idea.
Thank you, Derek.
He seemed to settle down and be quite good at as a father. I mean, my father, it was only 4 years of marriage before he died. Perhaps he was drinking less now and was therefore not assaulting his wife. Certainly it wasn't mentioned by the Boardmans at any point. Leslie, which, as I say, we met in 1960, and certainly the kids who barely knew, they are Janet and Jennifer. They barely knew that their grandmother had another husband besides their grandfather. I think those are the only questions on comment. Did your grandmother remarry? No, she didn't. Did my grandmother remarry after Charlie died? No, he carried on. She carried on. In fact, I've got pictures of her at numerous houses in Birmingham, which I've managed to visit. And when I mentioned to someone I was going to this suburb, they said, ooh. In fact, the relatives in England said to me, oh, it's full of puckies. And I thought, I've left South Africa to come here. I don't wish to hear those sort of racist comments. So, but we duly went to the place and took pictures of the house. It was one of the municipal houses. In fact, the Sanders, Margaret Boardman and Philip Sanders, they bought the house, or got the house through the municipality or corporation of Birmingham, and they lived there with Granny until she got too old, and then she moved into old age home. I do have a picture somewhere of her sticking her hand into Father Christmas's bag in 1953 to pull out a present at the old age home. And as I say, she died in 1958. So we just missed seeing her in 1960 when my dad was sent overseas on a Navy course. Rene says, have you considered your relatives may have moved? I think one of the, we're talking about back to the DNA and moving, actually. I've been in touch with Harold Pratt's son. He's, or grandson, I should say. He's Timothy Pratt, living in America. I sent him an email and I mentioned that I'd done my DNA, like hint, hint, would you like to share what you found? But he didn't rise to the bait on that one. But it'd be interesting to see whether, you know, there is some correlation with cousins in that. So that's about the closest I can get. And that's, yeah, that's the only Pratt I know of who's still alive. Rene, are you still here, Rene? Would you like to ask about what you meant by moving? May have moved where? Can't spot her.
No, I think Renee's left.
Has she left? Okay.
I think
Doesn't she just move, say moved from one town to another?
Who, the Charles Pratt, or how, that's what I'm asking.
Oh, Charles Pratt, I presume.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether he moved from Bradford. That's the whole question that I'm asking now. Is he the Bradford Charles Pratt? He says he was born there in the marriage certificate, at least on the census record. But is he the one I found in Bradford? He seems to be the only Charles Pratt born there. So I'm saying yes at the moment, but I'm quite happy, as I had to do, I did yesterday, I went through my brother's keeper and removed all the other Pratt references I had besides my father, and now I have to start again on that side of the family. There could be, it could be another Pratt, I'm not sure, you know.
Well, Derek, if there are no more questions from everybody, I'd just like to thank everybody for attendance and thank you very much for all your efforts. It really was a stupendous effort at such short notice. And I hope it heartens people to go and spend lots of money on Find My Past. Because it's obviously, that clip was very interesting. It's obviously an enormous task. I mean, you know, the people that are involved, no wonder it costs so much money.
Yes, exactly. There are about 4 other 4-minute clips talking about how to do the search and click on here and click on there and that sort of thing. Go to the site and just click on some of the more information sites. Sherry, you've been to that site and you've bought quite a lot already. You don't have to be a subscriber to look at these videos and things, do you?
I've had a subscription at some point, but
Okay.
I generally stick to Ancestry. But it does allow you to continue a free account. So I went in using my free account and I have to say I've bought 4.
Right.
And if you add that up, it's about 79 Rand per view. And one of them was the wrong person. So I've wasted 79 Rand. So I'm holding back from going in there again. And I didn't have any major surprises, which, you know, is not what I want. But Derek also tried to help me find my elusive great uncle, who was an actor. And one of the interesting ways of searching, I knew he was an actor or a musician because he was in Variety. So I didn't enter any name whatsoever, but I put in 2 code numbers for artists or musical artists or actors, and tried to find him, and there were so many, and went through and looked for his surname, which was Howells or Howell, or Best, which was his stage name, and I didn't come across him at all. And Derek had a go and didn't come across him. So for all I know, he was busy in vaudeville in America, which was a sort of family story that went around. But he could also have been in England, and he's been transcribed wrong. A number of people have been complaining on Facebook, various groups, saying the transcription is so badly done on the 1921 census and it's shocking, and why should we have to pay? I quite honestly think it's quite fair that we're paying when you look at the kind of work that was done. And the transcription errors are because everything was done in such secrecy that people only viewed strips at a time as they were transcribing. And so I'm willing to pay, but not at the moment.
Yeah. One of the videos talk about how the secrecy of they had to arrive to more or less a secret warehouse, be let in. You could only follow certain paths through the where the documents were stored. They couldn't wander around in any way, and no cameras, no camera watches, no rings on your fingers that could tear the document. So it was really quite a song and dance. And the transcription, I noticed I looked for Best in 1939, and I found it in the index in the transcription, and the bent.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of transcription error and in fact, I've written an article about for the next newsletter. And while I'm talking about that, I welcome any other newsletter articles, please. Thank you. I've written one about Claassen, which is and how the different spellings of the surname Claassen. And after looking at all the CLAASs and CLASSs and so on, I finally discovered it's the one I'm looking for is spelled KLAZEN. So even go for the weird and wonderful when you're trying different spellings, really.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your attendance, and especially to Derek. It was greatly appreciated. I will send you by email a bottle of wine, which is a normal. You'll have to keep a book. So when we get back together again, which I hope is going to be soon, the government is expected to make an announcement, I think, on the 15th of February, where they're going to end this lockdown or what they're going to do.
Okay.
So we look forward to that.
Good. Yes.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Derek.
Thanks for a nice comment. Thanks for the nice comment.
Thanks very much, Derek. Thanks for your hard work.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Derek.
Derek.
Yeah, pleasure.
Derek, I'm going to contact you about that dinghy that I saw whiz past.
Okay, yes. Obedience dinghy.
Obedience, yeah. My grandmother was a dinghy. My grandmother was a dinghy. And there were some, strange biblical names amongst them.
Were they from the
Birmingham?
Black
Birmingham.
Country?
Yeah.
Okay.
You might be related.
Yeah, we might be.
But those funny surnames, those funny first names, we worked out it was a lot of those from that time. That same I had a lot in the Slingsby's. There were all sorts of funny names suddenly that came up here, and most of those people were Pilgrim Fathers that went to America.
With biblical names, certainly.
With biblical names.
And also Quakers often had names like Grace and Sacred and Holy and things like that. I've been looking up what's happening.
I had some nonconformists in the family, so I don't know if they fall under that.
They'd be more congregational, possibly, but it could be, more on the far. We don't call them left or rights, but they're far out.
Not sure. Yeah. Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Derek, thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Hey.
everyone.